I do remember being one repeater.
All right.
It was creepy.
All right. Yesterday was the most important lecture out of them all, okay, for this unit. It's how we proved that the universe had a beginning, how it was proved over the last 100 years. So, if you weren't there yesterday, make sure to watch that. The recording didn't work, so I'm going to re-record it. So look for that when it comes on.
Why didn't it work?
It was just a mess up on the computer. Alright, so today is our last lecture of this unit. Okay? And then we'll get ready for the test. So remember, test on Friday. Okay? Alright, yesterday, what did we talk about? I just
Einstein.
said it.
Beginning of the universe.
Proving the universe has a beginning.
Proving the universe has a beginning, and what two men were
Einstein
Einstein.
and Hubble. Hubble.
So Edwin Hubble and Albert Einstein. What did Hubble do to discover?
He discovered the expansion of the universe.
Redshift.
Through redshifting. Yeah, through redshifting, he discovered that the universe is expanding. It's like a big balloon being blown up. What did Einstein figure out?
Space and time are connected.
Space and time are connected. He calls it the space-time continuum, or he calls it space-time, really. It's that they are one and the same, that they are not one and the same, but they are connected. And he visualized gravity in a new and unique way, which has since been proven, in that mass bends space-time. So imagine space-time like a giant trampoline. You put a bowling ball in the middle of the trampoline, you put a soccer ball at the other end, what's going to happen? The soccer ball is going to roll toward the ball with the bigger mass. Okay? Same thing, that's why we're in orbit. Okay, that's why our galaxies, that's why planets and suns and everything move, because they are in orbit. And around, basically, the mass of the sun, for example, is bending space-time to the point that we are orbiting around the sun. Okay, so it's those two ideas together kind of made us realize that you could go backward in time. If the universe is expanding, you can go back in time to a point in which the universe was either really, really small or really a point that there was no universe, right? And that's what proves that there is a beginning. Now, what we're going to talk about today is kind of the final nail in the coffin for the eternal universe idea, okay? Because that's, of course, what materialists wanted to believe for the longest time. They've wanted to believe that the universe is eternal. Why?
So there's no proof of God.
Yeah, they don't have to worry about God if the universe is unmade. If the universe is eternal, that solves the conundrum we all face, which is, why is anything here? Well, the universe has always been here, so we don't need to worry about a God or anything like that. Well, the idea that the universe has a beginning completely messes that up. So a lot of scientists, they didn't respond very well to the Big Bang Theory. Okay, and a guy named Robert Dick, he actually says the quiet part out loud. This is a quote from him. He said, "An infinitely old universe would relieve us of the necessity of understanding the origin of matter at any finite time in the past." They just wanted to be relieved of the duty of figuring things out, of figuring out what happened at the beginning. This guy, actually, this scientist, Robert Dick, he took the theory of the Big Bang and he started speculating. Well, if this is true, what kinds of things would we expect to find? And the big thing that he and other scientists realized is that if there was a point in the finite past when there was a giant explosion and everything started expanding, then there has to be some kind of residual after effect. They call it the afterglow. or cosmic background radiation. Think of it like a turkey that's been in the oven, okay? So what happens when you take a turkey out of the oven and you put it on the top of the stove?
The heat radiates off of it.
Heat radiates off of it, it's steaming, it's hot. It actually heats up the rest of the room.
Yeah, slightly. Not enough, though.
Maybe not enough for you to perceive
Actually, it depends.
Depends, right?
Yeah.
So, a turkey out of the oven, it's going to have this afterglow, even though it's technically done cooking. The explosion's already happened, in other words. And scientists were saying if there was a point in the past when everything exploded, we would expect a certain type of radiation. And they speculated, and then they started searching for it. And that's what this guy did. He was constantly searching for this background radiation, okay? Because he thought this would be proof that there was a Big Bang. So he wasn't actually the guy who found it, which kind of stinks for him, because this guy, I believe, is sitting without a Nobel Prize, and these two guys have a Nobel Prize. Even though he was the one who kind of speculated that it was out there, figured it out mathematically what it would look like, this background radiation. These guys accidentally discovered it. But they get the prize, they get the glory, right? Here's what happened to them. They were at a telephone laboratory in New Jersey. Just think of these big satellites, these really big machines, so that they were able to hear down to the microwave level. They were able to hear these tiny, tiny sounds. And what they realized when they turned this thing on, and they were trying to listen to all sorts of things, they kept running into this noise. And everywhere they turned, everything they listened to, they found this noise. And they were trying to get rid of it, right? You think it's like static on the line. There's something wrong with our machine. We need to get rid of this. But they couldn't. And they realized that it was coming from every direction. No matter where they pointed, this noise was everywhere. And it was always the same. Well, then they began to speculate, well, what if this is that background radiation that the Big Bang theorists are always talking about? So they called up this guy. He went to the laboratory and studied their data. And he came to the conclusion that yes, that's indeed what it was. So the Big Bang model had predicted this afterglow radiation, and it was years later that it was actually discovered. And since then, we've of course been able to document it more and more. So this radiation, this kind of residual X-ray radiation, it's everywhere. In all of creation, we've been able to observe it's always there, which again, it's kind of the final nail in the coffin, right, of the eternal universe theory. This is the proof that they were looking for. Whereas if the universe was eternal, you would expect this radiation to not exist, right? So again, it's just the evidence is mounting, right, for the universe having a beginning. Okay? So you might look at your worksheet there. What is cosmic background radiation? What is the answer? Somebody want to take a crack at it? What is cosmic background radiation? Let's call it. Yeah, it's leftover radiation from an enormous explosion. We find it everywhere. And for people who are religious, you could almost call this radiation an echo of God's voice. Right? God said, "Let there be light," and things exploded into existence. And we still have kind of the after effects of that amazing event, right? I think that's really cool. What it certainly does is prove that the universe is finite. But, as we've discussed, they didn't like this, materialists. But let's go ahead and look at the second question real quick. How was proof of this radiation discovered?
They were on, there's like static on the telephone.
Yeah, accidentally. as static on their sound equipment. And you need to write down these two names, okay? These two men.
Accidentally as what?
Static on sound equipment. The guys' names are Arno, A-R-N-O, Penzias, P-E-N-Z-I-A-S. Okay, Arno, you got that one?
P-E-N-Z-I-A-S.
Yes, P-E-N-Z-I-A-S, Penzias. Arno Penzias. And Robert Wilson. So, over time, just because this evidence came out didn't mean everybody accepted this theory all at once. There were still people clinging to the old model, to the idea that the universe is eternal, because they desperately didn't want to have to believe in a God, right? I think it goes to show that faith in a theory, even if it's a scientific theory, is very similar to faith in anything else. We don't like to change our minds. We don't like to have our viewpoints challenged, right? Even scientists can be that way. Not every scientist is as honest with the evidence as Albert Einstein was, because he saw this evidence and he said, okay, there has to be a God. But many other scientists have just come up with other models. Some of them just get more and more ridiculous, okay? So now let's talk about some of these models that have been proposed that try to account for all the evidence at play. So there's evidence that the universe had a beginning. How do we use that evidence and still state that the universe is eternal? Well, here's what's called the oscillating model. Okay, so on the back of your sheet, by the way, it says the oscillating universe. You're going to explain it on there, okay? So here's how this viewpoint works, okay? This is the idea that the universe has been expanding and contracting, and expanding and contracting over and over again for infinity. Okay? In other words, there's an infinite number of Big Bangs.
Expanding and contracting
For eternity. We just happen to be in one of these expansion cycles, is the idea.
I heard that it's always expanding.
What do you mean?
In my 8th grade science class, since I was in public school, we said that it's just constantly expanding.
Like for eternity?
Yeah. It doesn't get smaller, just gradually getting larger.
Well, yeah, we know it's getting larger. But the fact that it's getting larger means that you can go back in time to a point in which it was nothing. So that the fact that it's expanding proves that there's a beginning. But as we talked about in our thought experiments, you could have a beginning and no end, logically. But we'll talk about why that's unlikely. Okay, so at least for matter in the universe. So, the oscillating universe. This is the idea that, the universe is eternal. It just happens to be going through this cycle. It explodes. There's a Big Bang. Everything expands for a time. And then eventually gravity draws everything back to that single point. And then it explodes again. And it just goes over and over again for eternity. This is the oscillating universe model. Okay. Can you guys think of any problems with this? Okay, what?
Wouldn't have already happened.
What do you mean?
Wouldn't we have proved that already happened?
Yeah, wouldn't there be evidence of some kind that this has been happening? Right? Because in reality, we have zero evidence of this. This is just something they've made up literally to hold on to their philosophical viewpoint.
And what would be the thing so large that brings everything back?
They would say gravity, but again, there's no evidence to suggest that gravity is stopping the expansion, right? So why would we think it's going to stop it eventually?
And the gravity of what?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That again, the logic of it doesn't really hold up, because as everything gets further and further apart, the gravitational pull between masses
It's less.
is less, right? Less likely to bring everything back together the further apart that things get. So again, it doesn't really hold up to the logic. They would basically be saying, here's the other big problem. Okay, sorry. The other big problem. There's no mechanism that they've been able to devise that would start the re-expansion if things were to come back.
It would explode.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't have an explosive that can explode.
It
So go back and
explodes,
explode
and then
again.
it itself brings it back in.
Yeah, they have no explanation for the mechanism behind any of that.
Yeah.
Okay? They've just come up with this model and they said, we don't know how, but this is what we think is happening. Why do they think this? Again, because they want to hold on to the philosophical viewpoint, of which there's no evidence, that the universe is eternal. Okay? So here's another big problem that came up, and it has to do with the second law of thermodynamics. You can go ahead and write this down on the front of your sheet. Thermodynamics. Second law. This is a law, meaning it's been proven without any doubt in science. Okay? When it comes to the material world, hot things always cool unless you do something to stop them. Disorder, also known as entropy, always increases. In other words, the universe is always running out of energy. So what happens if you leave your house for 10 years and come back? What happens to the house?
It goes to the elements and it gets run down.
It gets run down, okay? It gets exposed to the elements. So what kinds of things would happen to the house?
Rain damage, heat damage, leaks, wind.
So maybe the roof would start to rot.
Yeah.
Everything starts to rot.
Everything starts to rot, really.
At that point,
Okay.
yeah. The water gets in, water damage everywhere, foundation could crack, all your plumbing would be gone, electricity would, the wires be probably chewed on.
Yeah, all sorts of things go wrong, right? A building doesn't just stay put and stay. In fact, this is true of everything, right? You buy a brand new phone. Oh, it's great. What happens to it?
2 years and it's obsolete.
2 years and it's obsolete.
Well, not really. It's been 2 years and mine's not obsolete.
Well,
I'll keep it forever.
you have a nice phone. No, but here's the thing.
What?
Everything runs down. Everything gets wear and tear. Everything runs out of energy. A fire that you start dies out.
Yeah.
Everything in the universe operates under this principle of entropy. And when you take this principle and you look at it more on a grand scale, what you realize is that order always becomes disorder. Unless there is a creative mind or a creative force keeping it orderly, right? That's where we come in, oftentimes. We're oftentimes the ones keeping order when it comes to nature and things like that. Okay, so the second law of thermodynamics, it's been proven over and over again. It's always going from order to disorder. Entropy, which is disorder, is always growing. So here's the idea. A guy named Alan Guth demonstrated this in 1984. And by the way, notice how we're getting closer and closer to our year. Right? So here we are in the 80s. Guth showed, when he took this second law, he brought it to the oscillating universe theory. And he basically proved that even if you drop a ball and it bounces, which is kind of what the oscillating universe theory is, right? Eventually it's going to run out of energy and stop bouncing. Which once again, which basically brings the oscillating universe model into the same issue that we have with the Big Bang Theory in general, which is it proves that the universe isn't eternal. Right? We're running out of energy. It follows that each cycle in this oscillating universe theory would have less energy each time. It would get longer and longer until eventually it stops being a cycle.
You die.
Yeah, the energy runs out. So, in other words, somebody can believe this theory all they want, even though there's no evidence for it, but it doesn't solve the initial problem that they were trying to solve by making this theory up. It doesn't solve or doesn't prove that the universe is eternal. Does that make sense? Alright, so that's the oscillating universe model. Some people still bring it out there, although it's much less widely accepted than it used to be. Okay? Alright, who's this guy?
He made his own wheelchair that speaks for him. I just forgot his name.
Forgot his name?
Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. Okay. He has passed away, I think it was
Isn't that like
like 3 or 4 years ago. Sorry?
Wasn't it a couple of years?
It was like 4 years ago. Okay, so that's very sad. He's a very famous physicist. He actually did some research that I kind of cut out of this material, class material. He further proved the Big Bang, but we don't need to deal with him in that regard. But he has since proposed another model, and this is your second one on the back of your sheet. A universe from nothing. Okay, so this goes back to the worksheet we did 2 weeks ago. There are only two options, right?
Yeah.
Either something's unmade or something came from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
For years and years and years, everyone in the scientific community understood that second option to be ludicrous. Something coming from nothing doesn't make sense. Therefore, they went to the unmade part, as we've been discussing, and they said, oh, the universe is unmade. Well, once you prove that the universe is unmade, you would think the only other option left is, okay, something outside the universe has to exist.
Yeah.
Again, that's the conclusion that Albert Einstein came to. But a lot of atheists have just simply gone back to, well, maybe nothing did create something. Okay? So here's a quote from Stephen Hawking. I'm not saying that this man was stupid or anything like that. But here are the kinds of things you can believe if you're holding on to an ideology or to a philosophical viewpoint that you want to believe in, right? You can believe all sorts of crazy things. Here's what he said. I think the universe was spontaneously created out of nothing, according to the laws of science. If you accept, as I do, that the laws of nature are fixed, then it doesn't take long to ask, what role is there for God? This was in his last book before he passed away. So, there's something very ironic about his question here.
Yeah, there is.
It says, what role is there for God? Maybe the creating part? He uses the word created.
Yeah.
Right? You can't have creation without a creator. Okay, what he believed was that basically there was nothing, there was literally nothing, but the laws of science existed. Conceptually, somehow.
Yeah, but who created them?
Exactly. It's a real issue. But a lot of atheists will not propose this theory. In fact, this is kind of the one they speculate on. They won't tell you that they know that this is true, but they're saying, I lean that the universe came out of nothing. And it really just completely goes against all the laws of science. The scientific method is based on the law of causality. The idea of cause and effect. Right? So this is the idea that literally at some point there was nothing, and then suddenly there was a universe. Okay? Exploding into existence.
Must be Thanos.
Okay? Does that make sense at all? No.
No.
And it really, if you believe this, then you can't really believe anything in science.
Yep.
Because science is based on cause and effect. We're trying to discover what happened, why this is happening in the universe, so we can observe it, right? We use inductive reasoning. What we're doing is we're looking for the cause, oftentimes. So, if the universe can spontaneously come out of nothing, then why not a Bengal tiger just spontaneously pop up out of nothing?
That'd be awesome.
Well, it wouldn't be awesome if it just spontaneously popped up in here, right?
What if it was a nice one?
But you get my point. The universe is infinitely more complex than just one of these living organisms.
Yeah.
But scientifically speaking, it would be completely ludicrous to believe that animals just pop into existence. Right?
It'd be creepy if they did, but yeah, they don't do that, so.
Now, there were scientists in like the old days who believed that maggots popped up out of like they were created out of food. Like you leave a piece of bread out, and a maggot will just appear. They thought it was being created by the bread and the oxygen. they didn't think it was coming out of nothing, but even that seemed ludicrous, right?
Yeah.
But compare that to the idea that there was nothing and then there was something, okay? I don't think I need to harp on this any longer. It's quite ridiculous. But this is what a lot of people believe. Again, in my opinion, they're holding on to this view because they don't want to believe in a God. Okay? That's the only explanation I can come up with, at least. Okay, last model. This is the idea that the ingredients are eternal, but the expansion is finite. In other words, there was a period of time in which all the matter of the universe, or I shouldn't say a period of time, eternally there was a pinprick of all of these things. Matter, all of the matter of the universe was in a pinprick, and it existed forever that way. But then one day, it just started to explode and expand.
Which literally doesn't make any sense either.
Why doesn't it make sense?
Because if it was staying the same for all that time, then what caused it? Well, it's something would have to change for anything else to change.
Exactly. So the whole point of an internal system is that there's no change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think of it like a bomb, or maybe something less violent.
No, that's a good example. It explodes.
It does explode. Okay, let's think of it like a bomb, okay? Let's say all the necessary ingredients in a bomb are in place, but it doesn't explode because no one has hit the timer.
Yeah.
Right.
Somebody has to hit the timer for this viewpoint to even make sense, right? There has to be some kind of choice. Otherwise, if everything was just a natural reaction, then you can't point eternally backwards. It would have happened eventually. You get what I'm saying? We might get our brains into a little bit of a pretzel trying to conceptualize it. But do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
If the ingredients were always there and there was no choice, there was no mind actually hitting the button, right?
And the button just pressed itself.
Then the button would have, if the button just pressed itself, then it would have had to have happened
Before.
some infinite time before, right? In other words, you're still looking at a beginning. So conceptually, this one doesn't really make sense. An uncaused first event violates, again, the principles of causality. So you're talking about a moment or an event that caused everything, but you're saying that event itself was uncaused. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay. Let me read you a quote. Here's a guy, just a couple of guys in one of the books, said, "It is very difficult to devise a system, especially a quantum one, that does nothing forever, then evolves." You see the problem there? A truly stationary or periodic quantum state, which would last forever, would never evolve, whereas one with any instability will not endure for an indefinite time. So, in other words, if the system is unstable enough that it eventually starts to expand, then that system's not going to last an infinite amount of time. But if a system is going to last an infinite amount of time, then it's by definition not going to change and start to expand. So the problem with this theory is that it just logically doesn't add up. Okay? You guys, what have you written down for that one? This is the belief that matter has lasted for eternity. This is number 3, by the way. This is the belief that matter lasted for eternity and then spontaneously evolves. Which in the end does not hold up.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it makes sense.
Say,
I don't know how it like, makes sense to people.
I don't know why people
I don't
do it.
honestly,
It's like
No, it's a very interesting discussion because you've got some atheists who will believe, in my opinion, the most ludicrous things imaginable, right? Like Hawking. Hawking, everyone looks up to him as this really smart guy, and I'm not saying he was stupid.
He was creative.
But he believed something that is so ludicrous. I don't know how anyone could believe it. Which goes down to this theory that, first of all, you can believe anything if you want to believe it. But then second of all, sometimes the more education you receive is more or less indoctrination. But anyway, we don't need to get into all that. But
It's a trip,
like which takes more faith? That nothing created something?
or something created something.
Or something created something. That's something which we cannot fully grasp, but by logic is God, and is eternal, and is powerful enough to actually create it. Right? So, when you really break it down, the fact that their universe had a beginning, which people call the Big Bang, is actually powerful evidence for the existence of God. Now, let me read to you another quote. This one is one of my favorite quotes of all time, okay? This is only the first half of it. But let's go ahead and read it together, okay? This is in a guy's book. The book is called Biblical Creation and Scientific Cosmogony by Robert Destro, okay? Here's what he said. The discovery of a definite cosmic beginning is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all, but the theologians. Who are the theologians? Us, Bible believers, okay? That's what I mean. Theologians. Yeah, a theologian is someone who studies God, basically. Okay? It says, they have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The development is unexpected because science has had such extraordinary success in tracing the chain of cause and effect backward in time. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. It's a great quote, right? It's this image of these scientists who they think they've been getting away from religion. They've been getting away from God. They've been proving, as we've shown the last couple of weeks, right, how materialism rose up in the scientific community. They thought they were unshackling themselves of belief in God. They were giving us evolution. They were giving us Marxism and so on. They were answering all these fundamental questions of where we came from, where we're going. And they thought, we no longer need God. But then as evidence, as science has advanced, all they've done is proven that there's a God. Which is very sad for them, very ironic, because they thought they've been getting away from all of that stuff, and they reached the top, and they're coming to the same conclusions that we have been telling them all along.
You just won't listen.
Many of them won't listen. Some of them do. Now here's the thing. A lot of them, over these last few decades, a lot of scientists have become believers in a God of some kind because of this evidence. Now sadly, it's not all of them. In fact, you could say it's not most of them.
That's because if you say stubborn, not like nice.
They're the most stubborn people.
And we can be the same way, right?
They're the most stubborn people in society.
Yes, because I feel like, I wasn't Christian my whole life. I was like open-minded to like other religions and options.
And that open-mindedness is what we all need to have. I'm not saying we are closed-minded. I'm saying we all have the ability to be closed-minded like that, right? So we all need to be willing to question our own beliefs. We all need to be willing to study the evidence itself and not be afraid of the evidence. I think what happens a lot with Christians is that they hear the word Big Bang and they don't want to talk about it. And in reality, we should be talking about the Big Bang because it's proving the existence of God.
That would be good.
It's also the feeding.
Maybe we will. Sorry?
Kind of self-defeating.
How so?
The Big Bang Theory.
How do you mean?
Or not the Big Bang Theory,
The idea that it came from nothing?
yeah, one where it explodes and then goes back in.
Oh, yeah, the oscillating theory, yeah. So here it is one more time. The cosmological argument. This is my favorite argument for the existence of God. Hopefully you see why. It's because of what we've talked about the last few days. Okay?
What are you looking over two on the back side?
The universe from nothing.
Yeah.
This would be, there was nothing,
And then there was something.
then boom, there was something. Many, you can write this, many scientists, especially well-known scientists, believe this.
Which one?
Number 2. Even though it completely goes against the laws of science, the law of causality. All right, so cosmological argument one more time. Everything that has a beginning has an adequate cause. What scientists who believe the universe from nothing theory is basically they're saying, yeah, premise number 1 isn't true. Even though it's the foundation for all of science, we're just going to throw it out the window, which is, again, very sad. But that's what they would say. They would say premise number 1 isn't true, therefore premise number 2 isn't. Okay? But we understand just through, this is basically one of those foundational principles, right? An axiom. One of those foundational principles of logic, okay? Everything that has a beginning has an adequate cause. The universe had a beginning. We have evidence that it had a beginning. Therefore, the only conclusion we can come to is that the universe had an adequate cause. Now, as we've talked about, I believe this argument gets us really close to the God of the Bible. It doesn't get us all the way, but it does get us past materialism, obviously, away from atheism. It also gets us away from pantheism. Do you guys remember what pantheism is?
Believe in multiple gods.
Believe that everything's
Oh,
God.
everything.
Everything is God.
I was thinking of polytheism.
Yeah. Polytheism, this could still prove polytheism. But here's the thing. Pantheism, the belief that everything in the material world is God. We all together make God. So we know this disproves atheism. How does this disprove pantheism?
Because we weren't there to create them.
What?
Is it a belief that everything is God?
Yeah, it's belief that everything.
Everything is everything together makes up God. The universe is.
Oh, I don't know.
But if it wasn't
Because
there,
if the universe was created, that means that there was a time there is no universe and pantheism.
It itself wasn't there to create itself.
Yeah. So this argument proves that something outside of the universe had to create the universe, right? Because the universe itself is finite. The universe itself has a beginning. Time and space have a beginning. That means that there was a point before and something outside of time and space has to have created it. And that's what gets us to God rather than kind of the God that is shared amongst us all, kind of like the Force, okay?
Yes.
I mean, that's where in Star Wars, that's where the Force comes from. It came from a lot of Eastern religions that kind of take this view of pantheism. All right. So, any questions, comments?
No.
Nope.
Sorry, I'm about to stop it.
Yeah.
By recording.
Should have got here, Steve.
This should be on YouTube.
Seriously, no questions, comments?